Diversity evaluation is one of the most important open issues in ecological research. This is in general, and specifically for the point of view of floristic issues. Biodiversity can traditionally be divided into three main big components. It's alpha, or local diversity, beta, diversity, or differentiation, and gamma, or regional diversity. Alpha diversity and gamma diversity are the number of diversity species within a certain community or within a certain area, while beta diversity is a sort of measure of the rate of change of species presence in a certain dimension. Beta diversity analysis can stress the presence of patterns in biodiversity along gradients within a specific area. We recovered a huge database of vegetation surveys, originally built in the 70s, to represent a specific ecological Schmidt vegetation belt. And we used all the data to perform some ecological analysis. The sampling design was perfectly suited to being analyzed in a beta diversity perspective, and this allowed us to use it for these purposes. And the aim of this work is mostly to present an exploratory analysis of the species turnover in Trentino using FOSS4GE to underline patterns and also to underline the fact that we can actually do everything in the process with FOSS4GE. The study area is in Trentino, which is I don't know, it doesn't work the pointer, but okay, he's here in Italy, and is one of the most forested regions in Italy, and it has a lot of biodiversity from different points of view. And in the 70s, this was launched, this Schmidt belt specifically inventory that was launched to became something that could be used from the point of view of management, but then it was replaced later by the forest types, which are much more detailed. And but after all these years, these data still maintain a lot of their information. Lost. Okay. Schmidt's belt data collection. Well, the Trentino region was divided in 16 homogeneous zones, and they were corresponding into 5 altitude belts. Within each belt, linear segments that encompasses the mountain sides in the perpendicular way to the contours lines were called series, and they were represented and individuated by these colors that you see here in this legend. And the transect, the sampling was carried out using transect, which means 10-meter path per 1 meter large, and everything was collected in that transect, and they were carried out every 50-meter height in this area. This is a photo of the sampling in 77, and the data were collected, the species were recognized, and everything was put to paper. So that was basically it, and how the data were collected. And later on, it was transformed into something super Star Trek technology for that area, for that period, and everything was later in 1999 reconverted into digital. So we had this data into digital. Just to give you an idea of the effort, of the sampling effort, there were 14 samplers and 517 transect lines, around 7,000 transects, and a lot of kilometers were actually walked. And just to show you how it works here, you see that the red dots, each one represents a transect, and every 50-meter height, there is another one. So basically, and these are the lines on, and this is the whole area of Trentino with all the transects that were carried out to transform this into an original sampling of. In the forcing project in 2016, we we transformed all the data and we reconverted them in geographical coordinates, and we mapped them using basically QGIS, sorry, and and retransforming them in national Italian coordinates. The linear transects that were originally drawn on the paper and used for the fieldwork were digited manually. And each single point corresponding to the center of the transect was automatically associated with a pair of coordinates using a Python script. A digital elevation model of the province of Trento was acquired from the cartographic portal, and it was used to determine some other specific features. The map were overlaid to other parameters to derive further information. Let's go to the methods. We used the beta diversity. We calculated the beta diversity using site as simple points, and this is the formula. I won't go through that too much because it's boring, but just to give an idea. The goal was to highlight, basically, the degree of species turnover across the environmental gradient created along the transect. And the dam was, the digital elevation model was reclassified in 7 altitude belts and of 300 meters of range, from a minimum of 0 meters to a maximum of 2,100 meters. Each belt was compared in terms of species composition using the Sørensen coefficient similarity, which is what you see here. And where A and B and are the total species abundances of the zones, and A and B and JN are the sum of the minimum abundance of each species between zones A and B. The index is one of the most suitable, or at least is considered one of the most suitable in comparative studies regarding that. And the technique of variation partitioning was used in 2 or more complementary sets of hypotheses to be and can be invoked to explain variation in an ecological response variable. The presence of significant relationship between the species would strongly support the hypothesis that there is an environmental control in something that is changing there. In this case, we tested the variance explained by 4 variables: mean altitude, mean slope, range of altitude, and range of slope, against beta diversity and species richness. The analysis should stress the role of the variable in single or in multiple way to drive the species turnover. The variance partitioning analysis were processed using the vegan package of the R, CRAN statistical software, and in particular the module varpart. Variance partitioning combination of group of 3 variables was applied, and both altitude and slope data and both beta diversity and species richness data were transformed with a log transformation to obtain a normal distribution of the data. QGIS was used, and also GRAS was used to recalculate the data and to check for errors. And different environmental covariates were collected from the path service, while others, for example, contours or slope, were created by digital terrain model. A quick look at some of the results. Both species richness and beta diversity show a similar trend. They increased with altitudinal range, slope range, and slope mean. But the variance does not show a definite trend considering the species richness. And so basically, these are calculated in this case. In this case, you have the relationship between beta diversity versus altitude range, altitude mean, altitude variance. And the other one, the figure 4, is relationship between species richness versus altitude range. And so we changed basically the variable. The Sørensen statistics, instead, you see that the solid lines show how the similarity decreases while the altitude separation from the lower level increases. And the red line shows the pairwise comparison between the altitude adjacent belts. The latter statistics shows how the similarity presents a different behavior with the altitude increase, which means that it rises very fast at the beginning, and so the first steps, and then it levels, and finally decreases again in the correspondence of the last 2 steps. This is the relative contribution of total diversity by each altitudinal belt, and is shown in these 2 figures. The first one here is the relative contribution to total diversity by each altitudinal in overall values, and this other is in the relative contribution to total diversity by each altitudinal belts but the values are standardized per area. And you see that is basically a pit here on these results. Just something to be precise and to be a little bit more clear on the area. The area that we are analyzing is Trentino, and Trentino has always been a very forested coverage, although in time it has changed a lot, the amount of forest coverage in the area. This comes from another study that we did. We collected the data from 1859 up to present to show the difference. But the area was basically always forested. But there are a lot of changes. For example, the timberline limit is shifting, or more or less 0.8 meters to 1 meter every year, which means that in the next 50 years, we will have that the plants are conquering the 50 meters on top of the mountain, if it continues like that. And this is something that will affect the distribution and also the quality and the difference of the species. So coming to the conclusions, discussions and the conclusions, the results confirm that the transects are characterized by a wider range of slope and elevation and show a higher rate of beta diversity. And basically, the number of different environments in the transect crosses, the more pronounced is the beta diversity. So basically, this is confirmed. This is also confirmed by the linear relation of the single variables, highlighted both in the graphical trend and by the Pearson test. Regarding the partition calculation, the values are very low, while the residues are high, especially for species richness. And with beta diversity, the factors considered and analyzed explain about 20-25% of the variance. The main factors are always connected to elevation range and mean slope. The Sørensen graph shows that in the bottom of the valleys, the species similarity is very high, while species similarity values decrease, gaining elevation. And it is interesting to compare this behavior with the linear relation graph. It has mean altitude and species richness, which show that this is a very flat relation. And this highlights that the number of species does not increase with altitude. So there is the species varies, but the number of species in general is relatively constant if you put. The relation between beta diversity and altitude, although appearing statistically significant, does not show a very high R-square value. And species turnover along the transect seemed relatively constant. The general turnover trend can be explained by the fact that many forest environments in Trentino are recovering from former overexploitation and that occurred in the 19th century and also in the Second World War. And this may affect the species distribution. Species are reconquering their place with different dynamics at different altitudes, as I showed you before. It could be interesting to analyze the species diversity in terms of anthropic disturbances, but we didn't have the time to do that. Further studies may include a temporal perspective that examines the beta diversity variation in the last 50 years. And as I showed you, this is the climate change is doing a lot of changes in the forest. Another interesting possibility is to compare more recent data, for example, those collected in the forest types with the data from this archive. Last slide is, this is a preliminary study. We didn't do everything that could be done with this, which is just a preliminary study. And our bigger goal was, okay, we also did some floristic analysis, but the idea was specifically to try to see if we could do the whole process in FOSS4GE. And we did it, basically. We started from collecting the data, from transforming them into geographical data, from using them to calculate them, the botanical variables and a lot of indexes and so on, and finally to store them into a WebGIS site. The problem is that the WebGIS site was attacked by the hackers, and basically, we do not have the possibility to show you the WebGIS. So it's a pity, but I can't do I cannot do anything right now. We will probably put it again when we will be able to do that. But honestly, I cannot say anything about it. And combining the historical sources with new data and remote sensed data will allow to reveal past landscape also, and model future scenarios that can help to guide environmental management choices. highlighting the most endangered priority habitats and the effect of climate change. So this is basically the general conclusion. I think what we have showed most is that we can do everything within FOSS4GE, starting from the collection of data to the analysis of the data to statistical analysis with R. Everything can be done with FOSS4GE. So we can rely on this software. When I started in the 90s working on that, a lot of these steps could be done, but you have to rely on proprietary software. But right now you can do everything with FOSS4GE. So sorry if I went a little bit after that, what we started later. So it's okay. Thank you very much.